it was hugely symbolic. And it did transcend football. I felt properly emotional about it. And I thought, wow, if only it could always be like this.
What do you say? It's a really good ball. It's Shabalala! Goal! Bafana, Bafana! Goal for South Africa! Goal for all Africa! Jabulila! Rejoice! Bafana, Bafana have popped the first cork on their day of days! Sip Shabalala!
Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Hayters TV podcast with myself, Charlie Willard, and my ever so dashing live stream and podcast companion, Nick Callow.
Great to be with you in real life in the studio, yes. Charlie. Nice to see you again.
Always good to see you, and we've got a very, very special episode today. But what I will say before we begin, thank you so much for the love and support on the first episode. We hope you do enjoy this series. We have very, very special guests coming up and special news coming out very, very, very soon. But I will say we have a very special guest today that I'm going to introduce. But before I do that, make sure, of course, you do like, subscribe, and turn that notification bell on so you do not miss any videos in the future and, of course, any more podcast videos. Right. Get ready for this intro. I've been planning this for a while. So, we have a man that is originally from Hayters, BBC Radio, ITV, BT Sport, CBS, a man that bleeds football, a man whose voice lights up the beautiful game in all its glory. Some would call him a poet, but no, a man who is a poetic genius on the mic. We welcome football commentator Peter Drury.
Too much, Charlie. Too much. Thank you very much.
Are you proud of me? Was that a good one?
Very, very good. Thank you. Yes. Undeserved.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excited. Thank you so much for that. That was good.
That was very good. I would have done it a bit more. I'd have gone a bit more and give it some full Peter Drury.
It puts me down.
But I just think before we start, and it's great just to say thanks so much to Peter. Peter and I have known each other for 30 odd years. Started on the same with this man, Hayter, who gives HaytersTV its name. But if you're tuning in to see an exclusive interview about Pete's exciting new work life and Sky and that stuff, that's not what we're here for. Peter very, very kindly agreed to come in and chat to us on the HaytersTV podcast about his career, about how to be a commentator, how to be a journalist, the do's and don'ts. Maybe you can one day join him in the commentary box if you listen keenly to what Peter has to say. But this is not about Sky. This is not about that aspect of Peter's life. That's for another time. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about your life as a journalist, your career, and some tips and do's and don'ts, and maybe some slightly amusing stories about playing football in the office at Hayters.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. So let's start by going right back, Peter, because I was reading an interview with you recently, and I didn't know this, because a lot of us, like me, I wanted to be a commentator. It said your first commentary was commentating on your mother doing the ironing.
Yeah, well...
Was she a good ironer?
She was outstanding. Better than me. I do the ironing these days, but I'm not... Well, it's all right, isn't it? It's all right, yeah.
I don't see any creases.
But, yeah, like, I suppose, kids still, and always have, since television and radio began, I pretended to be a commentator. Some would say I still do pretend to be a commentator. And anything I saw, I kind of described. I had a view out of my bedroom window of the park opposite our house, and my dad used to get up in the morning and he used to have to walk through the park to go and buy his newspaper, turn round, come back down the hill towards our house. And when he was coming back down the hill towards our house, I could see him 200 yards away, and it was like Cohen Yvette finishing the 1500 metres at the Olympics and seeing how quickly he'd reached it. I used to time it so I could say, and Drury finishes in 3 minutes 25. So anyway, there you go. It's been a bit of an obsession, addiction.
And so what were you watching or listening to? Because I used to listen to loads of football and sport, cricket and tennis on the radio before.
Well, it was all, as people of our age will say, that televised football didn't happen except the cup final in England-Scotland, basically, wasn't it, back in the day? And so yeah, I loved the radio and Test match special, of course, because as you know, Nick, I'm a big cricket fan. But in terms of football, it was Peter Jones and Brian Butler. They were the voices on the BBC. They were beautiful users of the language. They both had a wonderful voice, and they did what especially a radio commentator is supposed to do, and made you feel as though you were there.
And that inspired your style of commentary today, perhaps?
I wouldn't categorise myself with them, because to me, they're untouchables. Yeah. But they enthused me about broadcasting as well as sport.
Charlie, this probably sounds really strange to you, but as a child, I was given a record, a vinyl LP of the 1971 FA Cup final commentary, which was Peter Jones and Brian Butler, I think, when Arsenal beat Liverpool to do the double. So I was very young then, but I was given it a bit after. But yeah, Charlie, you weren't weren't at that match, were you?
No,
Nor was I. I wasn't either. But that's how people really tuned in to listen to these. It's the only way to get
Saturday afternoon, Nick. Saturday afternoon, because I wasn't in a family that went to football. I didn't start going to professional football matches till I was old enough to go myself. So Saturday afternoon, genuinely, I used to lock my bedroom door so that nobody would disturb me.
This is getting interesting now.
listening to the football on the radio. That's it was hallowed time, and I didn't come out until Sports Report was over at 6 o'clock.
Wow. I find that so interesting. And by the way, I'm going to be in awe, really, this whole podcast, because a lot of your early career is a lot of what people maybe aspire to be like. But where did your passion for football come about? Is it from maybe listening to the vinyls and locking your bedroom door? Because your passion for commentary, we'll talk about in a moment, but football in general, where did that passion come alive?
It was from there. And like every little boy and girl of my generation, I lived as a 6, 7, 8-year-old for the moment when I was 9, and mum and dad would let me stay up for match of the day, and that's what it was. And as I've just said, actually, we lived opposite a park, and I used to stand on the radiator in my bedroom because I could look over the road and watch the local teams playing, and just absorb all of that. And listen, like most commentators, I was an anorak. I used to cut out the match reports from the newspaper and put them in a scrapbook and all of that sort of thing. And in no sense, obviously, then was it some sort of clinically hatched plan to get into the business. It's just what a little boy did. And I played Subbuteo on the bedroom floor. Do you know what Subbuteo is?
I do know. I do know. My mum and dad. Shout out to my mum and dad, by the way. They did buy me.
Yes,
Subbuteo.
So I know
exactly what that is.
So I spent hours and hours playing Subbuteo with my brothers. Were older than me, so they used to lie in, but they got up and we played against each other. But for hours, when I was smaller and they were teenagers lying about in bed, I used to play World Cups by myself, and commentating on them. Yeah.
So my dad was a journalist, and I was always fascinated by newspapers and the newspaper journalism industry. That was always sort of an ambition of mine. Plus wanting to be a commentator, wanting to be a Peter Drury, really. Yeah. And I thought, how can I get? My dad was saying, well, you need to do a degree in this, that, and the other, and maybe to write to local papers. And someone once said to me, well, no, what you want to do is write to Reg Hayter, get a job at Hayters. That's where you will really learn how to be a journalist. So how did it start for you?
Well, I mean, I got ridiculously lucky. And in the end, everybody needs a break. When I left university, I went to university in Hull, and I became a trainee accountant, which I survived for a month, and I hated it. I hated it. Shout out to accountants, because they do a much more important piece of work than I do, but I couldn't hack it, and so I resigned after a month. And I started going through that process of doing exactly what you're saying, writing letters, applying for jobs that I had no chance of getting, had no qualification at all. The only experience I had of any sort was my last summer as a student, or the summer I left university. I did a little bit of work for the thing that was set up then around county cricket called Cricket Call, where you could ring an 0898 number and pay 45p a minute to listen to, in my case, Kent County cricket. And I did a few days on that, which I absolutely loved. I'd hate to hear it back because I suspect it was horrendous. And but really I had nothing behind me, and I answered amongst many, many others, and in those days pre-email and everything, I literally by the side of my bed had a pile of rejection letters that high.
Well, you got responses then.
I got people bothered to reply, which was nice. But I applied to one in the UK Press Gazette saying football writers required, no experience. And that was me.
He didn't like people to experience.
Well, no, but I went in and met him, the great man. And months later, once I was on the books, I went in like we all used to, creep into his office to see what he was saying about you. And I saw his notes on me, and all it said was Drury, good handshake. And that got me the job.
Yeah. Because you were a great written journalist. I mean, was I there at that time? What year was that? What would that have been?
That would have been the autumn of 1988. And I'll tell you what he did, and Reg used to do this to everyone who was new. He told me to, when I first shook his hand, he said, go away, and on Saturday, go and watch your local team. And I lived down in Kent. My local team was Sittingbourne. And he said, go and watch Sittingbourne play, and write me one report for the Sun and one report for the Sunday Times. So, stylistic contrasts. See if you can do it. So I was all ready to do that. That was on a Wednesday. On the Friday morning, the phone rang. It was him saying, we're short for Saturday. And we need someone to cover Wimbledon against Norwich for the Belfast Telegraph. And believe it or not, Norwich then, and it was only September, but Norwich were top of the league.
Oh, that season,
So the first game I ever covered professionally involved top of the league. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. And I suppose it must have gone. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. But I think somehow you sort of blag your way through. Yeah. And
but is it also, I sort of, from what I've experienced in such a sort of a short space of time, is almost sometimes, there is that element of luck, but is it creating your own luck? Having that sort of idea of being passionate about what you sort of area you want to
Charlie, the only thing I would say, because I have been so lucky, is that I think making your luck's a bit of kind of fallacy, really. But when the moment comes, you've got to pounce on it. So although I didn't have a clue what I was doing around Wimbledon against Norwich at Plough Lane that day, I suppose, if I'm to give myself any credit, I sort of found a way. Yeah. I worked it out. I watched others. I suppose I probably, knelt at the knees of gnarled old journalists and said, help, what do I do here? And somebody who I've probably long since forgotten did help me out and said, this is how you go about it. And if I've learned anything beyond all that down the years, is that, boy, you need your friends. You need friends in this business. And I guess I had friends then that I didn't even know I had, if you know what I mean. And
but you were doing it since from the age of 6 or 7.
Well, exactly.
So you'd be quite experienced by then.
Start from young.
Yeah. But it is completely different, isn't it? Actually doing it to the certain style and deadline and line and length so on. I think I started just a little bit after you then, because I can remember that late 80s period, and there was you and there was a guy called Alistair Yeomans who also had a lovely voice, very good radio commentator, still going AY. But and I was quite keen, but you two really, if any radio work or any broadcast work came in, they would just like, get out of the way, I'm doing that, because you were very driven to be a commentator, as I remember.
I did enjoy the broadcast work because I suppose it goes back to what we were saying. I loved the radio from growing up, and radio really has gone sort of beyond that now, but radio was always my dream. I didn't dream of television particularly because my heroes were on the radio. I did want to gobble it up, and so did AY, who remains a really good friend of mine and yours, I know, and has had a super career himself. So and that's what Hayters did for us all. It gave us a taste of everything. It gave us a taste of writing, and it did give us a taste of broadcasting. And actually, I remember Reg, who was very much a writer, actually.
Well, you were a good writer too.
They were better than me. There were plenty, but I was all right. I was getting away with it, and I was starting to get what we in the business call bylines and that sort of thing, and that's a kind of nice step forward. And that's when my chance came in BBC Local Radio in Leeds. And when I got that job, I remember going in and telling Reg, trepidatiously thinking, oh my goodness. And he was pleased for me, but he very much said, are you sure? Are you sure? Because, you're doing all right in the writing. And once you go down that road, it might never come back.
You never get back from Leeds.
Well, exactly, yeah. And mercifully, I mean, don't get me wrong, he was lovely and he gave me his blessing, but he gave me a sort of cautious blessing. And thank goodness he did.
Yeah, something else I think I can remember that day. I remember you coming out of his office, this sort of glass walled office, which you couldn't quite see through, and you were sort of quite misty-eyed. He said, I remember you said something like, God, you think, it's the first time he's ever praised me. He says, I'm actually, Peter, you're really quite good. You do realise that, don't you?
Yeah, well, misty-eyed also because, listen, did we not have some fun?
Oh, yeah.
Was it not a lovely... It was quite a hard school in a way, but it was a lovely school to be a part of. We were children, kind of living our best dream.
Absolutely,
which is as good as it could. Here we were, being paid to be young sports journalists in the prime of our lives. We went out, we had a few beers, and we did our job properly, because if we didn't, he was right on us. And I didn't want to leave.
But I can tell you, Charlie, even back those days, how were you in your late teens, early 20s? Again, we had a gig once doing West Ham, which you had a bit of a soft spot for the Hammers, and didn't you? Against Hull, there was an order from Tiger Talk, which was I think it was the Hull City radio.
Sounds like the Hull City.
And it was quite a sort of mediocre, modest midweek game. But I remember, this is one of the reasons that put me off being a commentator, because Pete was so exceptionally brilliant, better than anyone else. He was giving it full whack the whole city. The Tigers are roaring. West Ham are snoring. I can't believe what I see before me. I don't even
Quote that, by the way. That's brilliant.
Funnily enough, it was at Chelsea that.
Oh, was it?
Chelsea?
Okay.
No.
Never let the facts get in the way of your
No,
story.
but the point is true, and I've had to survive banter around Tiger talk ever since. And funnily enough, also, of course, I had a soft spot for Hull because I'd been to university there. And so in an office full of people who thought, who's Hull City? I actually did know a little bit about Hull City, and so that was fun. But Tiger talk was a big moment in my life.
I think the reason I made that point was you treated every game like a World Cup final.
Yeah.
You gave it your full attention, detail, and passion.
Yes,
and you took that into radio, and that's what.
But I also think that's because of the love you have for the game as well. I think it doesn't matter what game you're attending. You always, from what I've gathered from the short moment we've met,
I think the important
you're blessed
thing
to do every game.
Well, that's honestly the trouble is if you say this too often, people start to think it's an affectation, and what I can say honestly is that it's not. It is authentic, and I think any of us who get paid to pursue something we love need to be grateful for it. And if I hear myself being less than enthusiastic about a day's work, if I wake up in the morning and think, oh, it's only them against them, it's 14th against 12th, whatever. I mean, all of us, I would say, have to say, hang on, 30,000 people are paying 40 quid to watch this.
Maybe more.
Yeah, exactly, more, exactly. And I'm going to cover it. This is a remarkable privilege. And if I might think part of the process of preparing for a game as a journalist, certainly as a commentator, is to think, I always take 20 minutes to take a step back and think, right, essentially, what is this all about? Basically, in journalistic terms, what's the story? Is it about them going up, them staying down, them? And when you have 12th against 11th, sometimes you're thinking, what is the story? Where am I going with this? And the best way of getting to the answer sometimes is to think, right, if I was a fan of Club A, what would I be thinking? As I'm buying my burger and buying my programme, I'm thinking, what am I wanting out of this game? And then do the same with Club B. What am I wanting out of this game? Love to beat them. Don't much like him. All of that stuff. And thinking, right, what is this about for the people who are going to consume it? And don't dare to think this is a nothing game, because it's not. It's not. And also, by the way, it's always exciting because either it's a great game and someone scores 5 and someone scores 6 or whatever. But if it's 0-0 with 5 minutes to go, I know as somebody who's supported football and who gets that feeling in the pit of his stomach and is terrified, 5 minutes to go at 0-0, Charlie, is thrillingly terrifying.
One team wants to score, the other team wants to score.
They might score, we might score. And do we settle for a draw? Should we just kick it out and waste time, or should we go for it? All of that. And my whole weekend dynamic is based on what happens in the next 5 minutes. Now, it might have been an awful game, but don't tell me it's boring, because for the people who've invested in it, it's not.
Wow.
Yeah. Do you keep a record of how many games you've been to? You that sort of Anaraki still? It must be thousands.
It must be thousands, but no. Funnily enough, I've just had some work done in the house, and I found an old football yearbook, not Rothman's actually, another one from
News of the World.
No, it's not that one. It's one that didn't last, that didn't sort of pass the test of
Playfair,
time.
was that one?
No, it wasn't even that.
These names are all going over my head, by the way.
Remember that? But it was from the mid '80s, early '80s, when I started going to football matches as a student, and I did write down every one I did, probably for the first sort of 100 matches I ever went to, up to and including the very beginning of my Hayters existence. But I didn't keep it up, sadly. I really wish I had.
So you made it back from Leeds anyway. The BBC thought we need to get this guy down to London.
Well, that was another bit of luck, Nick. First of all, I was lucky to be at Leeds when Leeds became champions, which was the last pre-Premier League season, and still the last English manager to win it, Howard Wilkinson, who knocked me into shape, as a very young, wet behind the ears reporter, and he was very good for me. Sometimes very hard on me, but very good to me, and I got lucky, because that gave me within the BBC a little bit of a profile. If I interviewed Howard at the weekend, people would want it for the network and that sort of thing. And B, I got lucky because that was the point in history when broadcast exploded. And in the BBC, that meant the advent of what we now call 5 Live, which made the whole thing mushroom. And of course, satellite television was just starting. And so suddenly there was a great welter of opportunity. and people left radio to go to satellite television, and so there were spaces in what was an already expanding BBC radio department, and that all happened at the right time for me, mercifully.
But you had the skills to cope with it, and you were, I mean, we're friends, I can say it without making you blush, you are and were very, very good. No wonder you succeeded, you know.
I hope so, but I was also in the company of people who were very, very good.
Okay, yeah.
And
who were your contemporaries around that time?
Well, I joined BBC local radio at the same time as Simon Brotherton. BBC Network Radio. Simon Brotherton had come out of local radio. Marcus Buckland, who you've seen on tennis and football and so on, he was in the same sort of group as me. A year ahead of me, and still absolutely my kind of best mate, Miles Harrison, who's been Sky's rugby commentator for many, many years, and I live a mile from him, and we're mutual godparents and all that sort of thing.
Wow.
John Champion was a couple of years ahead of me, and he remains a very good friend. And actually, I sat in the BBC Radio sports room with Claire Balding, who's got her huge moment coming up in a day or two when she hosts Wimbledon from the very front for the first time. And we were a very happy little club together, and I'm worried because I'll have missed someone out. I know I was lucky to be in a very, very good class, but we also cared passionately about the people who we considered up in the stars beyond us then, the sort of Tony Adamsons of this world, and Mike Ingham and Alan Green and all those people who were ahead of us in the pecking order. And there was a real sense of, in those days, of academy there, and treading in famous footsteps. And so I think you probably did learn, to use that old-fashioned word, standards, and it mattered that you did it well.
And having a group like that round you, of course, maybe you didn't know back then all of you were going to sort of become these fantastic commentators and reporters, but having that such good group round, you mentioned friends at the start of this podcast as well. Yeah. Did you see them as also good friends and people that as well, maybe you took different inspirations from each other at times?
Yeah, well, it's funny, Charlie, perhaps, where you're at, you'll see this. It's funny because in that sort of circumstance, right back to Hayters and into local radio and into network radio, you look around you and you see friends, and just like, I suppose, players in the England squad, they're beautifully bonded, but they must see friends and they must see rivals. Either I play or you play. Yeah. And yet we're training together, we're going out together, and it would be disingenuous of me to say that, or to deny that once in a while, one of them got a break, one of them got to cover a game that I wanted to cover, and I was thinking, it's him, not me. And presumably, maybe they're nicer people than me, but I'm guessing they perhaps thought the same things back. But we were friends. We were, and by the way, we take such pleasure in each other now, and it's great.
And it goes back to as well what you said about taking that big break. They had the big break sort of come up and they had to snatch it, and maybe it's fair game, but you look back and you go, do you know what, maybe without them moments we wouldn't be where we are.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And you need the story to fall on your watch, or
I think you're beginning to understand that, Charlie, that sometimes you want to be covering the cup final or the big top of the league games, and sometimes it's just important to be at the lower games or the lower divisions, and you just have to sort of, and even when you're at the top as Peters, you sometimes have to cover 11th v 12th. I mean, you probably never do a non-Premier League game these days, do you?
Well, it depends who I'm working for and who's got the rights to what, Nick, to be honest. Okay. But my favourite games, if I'm perfectly honest, talking sort of generically, I love an early rounds game in the FA Cup.
Oh, do you? Yeah.
I love it when there's a story to tell about the non-league team, because when you're doing Man United Liverpool, actually there's not much you can tell anyone. Everybody knows. What are you telling them?
True.
But if you're doing Hampton and Richmond or Blythe Spartans, there's a story to tell. You can go and meet the people, and they're real people who run the fish and chip shop and you've got something to really get your teeth into. And all of us as journalists of one type or another, all we want is the narrative.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad you said that, because what I want to sort of tie into in the next segment is talking about maybe the smaller games as such. This was a huge game, what I'm about to mention, by the way. It was the opening game of the South African World Cup. And there was a very famous bit of commentary where the South African forward had scored, and it was almost like a goal for Africa, and it was so symbolic as well for the game. Do you really thrive off their moments, don't you? I really liked what you said there, where sometimes covering those bigger games with the bigger teams as such. No disrespect to South African football team, by the way.
It's a World Cup, wasn't it?
But there is always a story within a story.
There is, and that one, Charlie, was a pretty easily identifiable one. Of all the things I've been lucky enough to cover, that remains the one, the number one in my head. Nothing to do with what I said, by the way, but just around the occasion, because it was hugely symbolic. And it did transcend football. And I know this is all cliche, but honestly, walking up to that stadium in Johannesburg that day to see black and white South Africans arm in arm, smiling, a country seemingly united, and that's not to be flip about the massive problems it had up to that point, and it still has, but seemingly in that moment, conjuring up a sentiment which, if you could just bottle it and inject it, would make the world a better place. I felt properly emotional about it. And I thought, wow, if only it could always be like this. And wow, this is sport doing something that no politician will ever achieve. It was a beautiful thing. And then this young kid called Shabalala, a boy out of Soweto, scored that goal. It's doing it now. It's the goal that makes me well up and brings up the hairs on the back of my neck. Because, bless him also, it didn't go in off the back of his knee. He walloped it.
Fantastic goal, and right into the top corner.
and it was just a beautiful moment. And you know, that's it. And it would have been a beautiful moment, whoever happened to hold the microphone. I just happened to be lucky enough to be sat in that stadium, and it was it's a really
musical
special
sort of name, isn't it? As well.
Oh,
yeah.
It rings. It sort of rolls off the tongue very nicely, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And speaking of those games, I think it's really interesting because, by the way, if we would have sort of asked you guys in the comments what you'd like to have asked Peter today, one of course, would be what would be your most iconic moment, but I guess that one's up there as well. But you've covered some amazing games, amazing World Cup games as well, and recently the World Cup final in Qatar. How was that for you? Because one, it was an incredible game, but it was also a very special game for the man that's on this magazine right here, Lionel Messi.
Yeah, it was ridiculous, wasn't it? It was ridiculous. If you were a journalist, and of course there were thousands there, and you were told to provide 1,000-word match report for that final, where the hell would you start? Honestly. Kylian Mbappe scored a hat-trick. Messi didn't. Messi won the World Cup. You had the two iconic names. I suppose if we'd had Messi or Ronaldo, you might have said it could have been more in that regard, but forget that. Here we had Messi and Mbappe, France-Argentina, the end of a hugely contentious World Cup, which actually in purely football terms had been a belting World Cup. It was a really, really good competition. And then we had this, beyond all reasonableness, stupid narrative play out. You know, it was just crazy stuff that you could not possibly have premeditated. It was just silly. And he ends up winning it and lifting the World Cup. And I don't want to sound pompous, but from a broadcaster's point of view, you often hear people say Messi defies description. And I would argue with that, because actually the great thing about Messi is that he invites description. You know, he is a beautiful, beautiful athlete. And, you know, if you stop to think about ways you could describe him, then you've got a wonderful blank canvas that he offers. And he certainly offered it then. How lucky to be there.
Yeah, but do you get time to stop to think of ways to describe him? Are you at home or in the hotel room before writing out loads of different Messi lines? And
No. Well, my rule is this, Nick. My rule is quite straightforward. Nothing between the first whistle and the last whistle can possibly be premeditated. You're asking for trouble if you start the night before preconceiving lines about what might happen. Because what might happen, or what does happen, will be to some degree a little bit different to how you preconceive it. So if you start thinking, what will I say when Messi scores the winner, then you're heading for trouble. Yeah. And let me give you the best example as to why that is the case. The Aguero goal. Okay, the famous Aguero goal, 2012. I was lucky enough to work on that for the global feed for the Premier League. There's not a commentator, I imagine, who didn't go to that game that day thinking, I better be ready for the moment the final whistle goes and Manchester City are champions. They only had to beat QPR. Of course they were going to be champions. Of course we all had a line ready for Manchester City. We had a line ready for Company to lift the trophy. Was it Company then?
I can't remember.
I should know.
Yeah, it was,
I should know that.
You were there. I think I was on an aeroplane that day, didn't
But anyway, well,
I heard it was a good game.
Of course we did, yeah. But if you had had a line for Manchester City's winning goal, it would have been nonsense, wouldn't it? It would have been nonsense, because what played out was beyond anything you could possibly have premeditated. And that is the ultimate warning. So, first whistle to last, just, I'm afraid, you react.
Yeah.
That's not to say that, say in the case of Messi, you wouldn't think of, you know, Messi is so often described that I think it's a reasonable part of preparation to think, you know, what's another adjective for Messi? But before the game, those moments when they're milling around in the tunnel, walking out, crossing the white line, that's a set piece. Not to prepare for that is like saying to David Beckham, don't practice free kicks.
Yeah.
You know, of course, you know what's going to happen. You know where the goal is. You know where the wall is. And Messi walking up to lift the World Cup, come on. You know, either he's going to walk up for it or the captain of France is going to walk up for it. I'd be a liar if I looked you in the eye now and said, I didn't bother, I just waited to see. I think that would be a failure of duty not to prepare for that.